This is Webster Topley reporting this week from New York City. I am in New York City for the Left Forum, and if you hear this on Saturday afternoon, you have to be in Manhattan or pretty close to come over to John Jay College of Criminal Justice on the West Side, and come and listen to our event and take part in it, participate. And that's going to be about 3 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, the Left Forum. There is some vague possibility that it may be live streamed, so this I just don't know. That's completely up in the air, but it might be, so I guess check my Twitter feed would be the place to look for that. So looking forward to the Left Forum. Now, in doing this, I'm considering the talk I gave a year ago here at the Left Forum, which was focused really on two things that stood out. One was that the Syrian civil war had taken an important turning point. That was the liberation of the city of Qusair on the Lebanese border, or near the Lebanese border, perhaps halfway from Damascus to Homs, a bit over to the west of that line. And that this meant that the terrorist rebels, the lunatic fighters, enemies of all civilization, that had been brought in by Prince Bandar of Saudi Arabia and indeed by the Qatar royal house, that they were going to be defeated. And that, of course, then led, after it became clear in June that the terrorist rebels were on the ropes, that led to the attempted false flag event by Kerry, Fabius, Haig, and the rest of this gang to try to get the bombing going. And at that point, Putin and Lavrov intervened to prevent it. So that's one continuous thread that we want to talk about again this year, the continuing defeat of the terrorists in Syria, and in effect the defeat of what has to be considered a secret army of the CIA. Although, of course, for some reason, Ed Snowden can't tell us anything about how that was set up, even though this whole thing had been very much going in 2011, 2012, plenty of time, 2013, for old Ed Snowden to tell us about it. But somehow this is not his cup of tea. The big stuff, that's not on his agenda. Anyway, last year at the Left Forum, I also talked about the coming of a mass strike wave in 2015, and that there would already be signs. There were already signs then, and the signs have continued to multiply. You've just got to be sufficiently flexible and, up to date in the definition of what a mass strike might look like. For example, you look at Ukraine, and we've just had this magnificent march of workers, right? There was a column of industrial workers, steel workers and coal miners, as far as the eye could see, demanding that the killer fascist clique in Kiev back off with their bloody attacks on civilians in eastern Ukraine. All of that going on, of course, with the cheers of Samantha Power, her loopiness, and Kerry and Nuland and Piat and the rest of these people, really, who I think will be spending a vacation in Nuremberg before too long. Think about that as a mass strike. In other words, think about what you see going on in Ukraine as, to some degree, a political mass strike spearheaded by coal miners and steel workers, and they're fighting fascism. Seems like an old or outmoded way of looking at it, but I think that gets you right to the heart of what's actually going on before your eyes. And we will also spend a little time looking at the question of the European Parliament vote, which, of course, a mass strike is not an election per se, but the results of an election, and this has happened again and again, the results of an election can be influenced one way or another by a mass strike. So I would say the fact that Syriza of Alexis Tsipras is now the number one party of Greece, and they're demanding an election, they're demanding the dissolution of the parliament and early elections. The fact that Tsipras is out there as the presumptive prime minister of the country, you can say that that's the fruit of a mass strike going on over the last couple of years in the background. And, surprisingly, in Spain as well, the emergence of the Podemos party, whatever critiques or differences we might have with their, with the details of what they're doing, that is certainly a very encouraging turn of events. And I would say one of the things we'll try to raise here at the Left Forum is, okay, guys, you were big fans of the Indignados, the essentially anarchists, right? The anarchist encampment of Puerta del Sol, Madrid, built by the army, as we had occasion to point out on this broadcast, right, with a direct eyewitness report. The camp was built by the army because the reactionary and fascist forces of Spain wanted a backlash. So you bring in the Indignados, they proceed to camp in the park, essentially, or camp in the public square with all the functions that go along with that. And then you get a backlash. All right. But now, distilled out of that picture, because that's all you can call it, backlash first, and Rajoy, the reactionary austerity fiend, was brought in. Now, at least part of this Indignados movement, if that's what you want to call it, has seen the light and formed a political party. And not only have they done that, they've gotten 8% of the vote and 5 seats in the European Parliament. And I think that's a very good model. So I would go to the leftists gathered here in New York this week and say, look, you were telling us how great those were. Now that the best Indignados have formed a political party with a program, the program obviously needs a lot of work, but and they've shown that this can be done in 3 months. What in God's name is preventing that from being done here in the United States? Why must we always have the path of anarchist impotence and paralysis and indeed sabotage? No way around it. But I think that's also the fruit of a mass strike process. And indeed, all across Southern Europe, you can say, and again, this is very much a matter of the intentions and the desires and the aspirations of voters, right? Because that is what we're trying to determine, not how corrupt the various political leaders are, because a lot of them are. But in Portugal, in Spain, in Italy, with the defeat of Grillo, right? Grillo had said he was going to come in first, and instead he lost votes. He lost 4 or 5 percentage points of the overall vote. Grillo, racist, anti-foreigner, defeated. In Greece, we've said it, Tsipras and Syriza number 1. And in Romania, there is a pro-labor, anti-austerity vote. Well, you could say, well, Renzi of Italy, how can you say this is all pro-labor? Well, the appearance is what they were voting for, and the appearance was that he arranged a payment, a tax refund of 80 euros per person. And that's obviously chicken feed, $100, a little bit more. That's more concrete than the endless blathering, dithering, screaming, threatening, rageful Grillo was able to do. If you go to an Italian worker and say, what did Grillo do for you? The answer is absolutely nothing. And Renzi can say, at least, well, I gave you an 80 euro tax refund. So something is better than nothing. Obviously, Renzi remains what we've said here. I guess we're now going to have our second segment of World Crisis Radio. Things are a little bit unsettled because we are on the road here and using not the usual equipment. All right. So those two themes, right? Yeah, a big defeat for imperialism that gets us into the Russian question, and then, of course, this issue of the mass strike, which has taken to forms that are perhaps unexpected. But we're still on track. 2015, I think, is still a very good estimate of where this is going to happen. The other thing that we have to mention is this question of how insane the U.S. ruling class is, right? How bonkers they are. How have they lost their moorings, right? How they are absolutely incapable of being realists and understanding the world. And part of it is that over the past 25 years, all of these figures, right, be it Kerry, be it Samantha Power, be it Victoria Nuland, be it this guy Piat, be it Obama, of course, and his entire crew there in the White House, Susan Rice, and so forth. They've all bought into this doctrine of the end of history. And you'll remember what this was. I urge you to take a look at my Bush biography, right? George Bush, the unauthorized biography, 1992. And in here, you will find this question of the end of history. Francis Fukuyama, neocon quackademic, emerged as the House ideologue of the Bush administration, and he was able to do this with an essay called The End of History. Now, the end of history, my thesis is that phase is over. History did not end. History stalled, if you will, for a while, and this was this period of unipolar U.S. domination, which has been a failure. It's been bad for the U.S. It's brought out the worst of the U.S. ruling class. It has allowed the rise of creatures such as the neocons, who under normal conditions just wouldn't be tolerated, right, by voters. They would not be able to present themselves in public with their demand for war, right? And if people understood that war is a two-way street, they would not propose it so lightly, right? I guess John McCain is the clearest example of this. I'm just trying to find you. Let's see if I can find you these interesting quotes that are in the Bush biography. Here we go. Fukuyama. Fukuyama wrote in 1990, 1991, as the Soviet Union was collapsing, the triumph of the Western political idea, one idea, is complete. Its rivals have been routed. Political theory, at least the part concerned with defining the good polity, is finished. Political theory is over. The Western idea of governance has prevailed. What we may be witnessing is not just the end of the Cold War or the passing of a particular period of post-war history, but the end of history as such. The end of history as such. That is, the end point of mankind's ideological evolution and the universalization of Western liberal democracy as the final form of human government. The modern American state, and this means the degraded thrall of financiers, zombie bankers, and assorted predators, that's what he means. The modern American state, not the New Deal state, but this other one, the modern one that he likes, is the final rational form of society and state. That was Fukuyama. That was the ideology of Bush 41, and that's pretty much where the foundations of globalization and unipolarity were laid. And this is what all of these imperialist bureaucrats believe. They have built their careers on this, right? They believe that this arrogance, right, this radically anti-historical way of looking at the world, it couldn't be more radically historical than anti-historical than to say we're now living in the end of history as such. Whoa, the end point, the Omega point, it has mystical, crazy overtones. this is what's going on in all their heads. And also, we have these other quotes from Jessica Matthews in the Power Shift essay from the Foreign Affairs, right? That the post-1648 system of states, of nation states, that's over. And instead what we're going to have from now on is the rule of non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and international hot money and, instant communications. And remember, this is Jessica Matthews, who wants one NATO division on the ground in Ukraine, composed of one U.S. brigade and then 4, 5, 6 battalions from other NATO states. Added up, it makes 2 brigades. 2 brigades make a division, and there you have it. So these people are nuts, and that's one of our biggest problems. But now, the news of this past year, and I think beyond anything else, is the idea that history has reasserted itself. We're not living in the end of history. History is not over. At most, you could say it momentarily stalled, and now it is revving up once again. There is a definite challenge to this entire unipolar system, and that goes for the geopolitical side, where we see Putin acting. I mean, we could follow this into the land of Hegel, right? You could say, well, he's acting as the embodiment of the world system, right? The Weltgeist is coming on the scene, right? And notoriously, when Hegel saw Napoleon in Jena around the time of that battle in the Napoleonic Wars, Hegel wrote, I just saw the Weltgeist ride into town on a horse. Well, you can see Weltgeist Putin talking on the radio, but of course, it's a mystification. It's a nice metaphor, sounds trendy, but it's all a matter of the policy of a government. The thing that we need, and what we may be about to get, given the way things are going in Ukraine, is this question of the economic globalization and the Glaziev proposals, right, which remain on the table. Sergei Glaziev and his idea that it's time to de-dollarize, right, exclude the dollar, use the ruble, and that's for the huge amounts of energy that they sell, and time to have the central bank provide cheap long-term credit. And we'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio in New York City here for the Left Forum. So, with Glaziev, what's the idea? Use the ruble, not the dollar, in foreign trade. He's ready to sell off U.S. securities. It's about $500 billion. That will stir the market to some degree. He's also ready to default on dollar loans. Look, he says, if you don't let me earn dollars, then I won't have any and I can't pay. And that's two tough lines for you. But above all, 2 things. Capital and exchange controls that banks would have to justify and essentially get permission implicitly from the VEB Bank and other Russian banks in order to be able to send money overseas. That's one thing. And, of course, it would mean that you would not be able to organize a panic run on the ruble or the GKO Russian state bonds, if that's what they're called still today. You would not be able to organize that kind of a panic run because you'd have capital and exchange controls in place. It builds on the Mahathir Mohamad experience of 1998 in Malaysia, and it's a piece of the whole thing. If Russian companies can't get bank credit from Europe or the U.S. because of sanctions, then the Russian central bank will be directed to come in and replace those loans with long-term, low-interest ruble loans from the Russian central bank through the VEB Bank. Now, it's the Siloviki, the power ministers, against the neoliberals and the oligarchs. That's Moscow right now. And remember, the liberals, the neoliberals, are a powerful faction. They're led by Medvedev, needless to say. German Graf, the Minister of Economic development and trade. Alexei Kudrin, the former deputy prime minister and finance minister. Anton Siluanov, neoliberal. This is a little vignette from a meeting of the Russian cabinet in the evening of April 22nd, where the question was, does the Ukraine emergency and the possibility of Western economic sanctions, does that justify a basic change in the Russian economic policy? And Medvedev, this is actually Medvedev to the Duma before the evening meeting, Medvedev says to the Duma, look, essentially neoliberal economics are untouchable. We have to stay with them and we never change. Quote from Medvedev, I do not believe it is correct to change Russian economic policy, in effect, in any fundamental way. It would also be incorrect to start to flip-flop, trying to think up some new principles of development for our economy, such as dirigism, protectionism, mercantilism, the ones that succeed. Russia, of course, may have its own pathway with regard to national consciousness and values, but the laws of economics remain universal. This means the neoliberal Manchester School, in effect, right? Ricardo and Mill and all these bums. The laws of economics remain universal, and in the face of this unprecedented challenge, it is extremely important for us to calmly, without hysteria, continue the economic strategy we have chosen. And the answer to that was crickets. Crickets. So in other words, Medvedev is out of step and out of touch, and I think that goes for Siluanov and Kudrin and Gref. So the Glaziev policy is the one that's needed, and obviously this goes right to the heart of the principal weakness and vulnerability of the Putin, the governing solution that he represents. Under conditions of imperialist attack in Ukraine and with these sanctions being imposed, I think this is now a concrete possibility that Russia will have to break out of the system in the way that Glaziev has outlined. And I hope they do. I think that would be the best thing for humanity. And this would essentially complete the restarting of history. In other words, if you want to function on all cylinders, you've got to end this whole economic liberalization thing. Now, what might cause this to happen? Well, obviously Ukraine, right? Ukraine has had a fake election. I was on Press TV about a week ago before that vote, I guess on the eve of the vote. And remember that candidates for the presidency of Ukraine were beaten, forced to stop being candidates. The same thing goes for members of the infamous Ukrainian Rada. They were beaten, forced to flee. What you've got calling itself the Rada is a rump Rada with a couple of hundred deputies, in effect, that have been purged. This is pretty much what Hitler did in early 1933 when he forced the communists out of the Reichstag, right? Arrested some of them, intimidated others, made others flee, and then got himself voted these sweeping emergency powers, right? Vermächtigungsgesetz, as it's known in historical writing. So, you also have killing going on, right? The Odessa massacre, was it 50 dead, 100 dead, 150 dead, killed by gunmen, inconstant fighting, and so forth. So this is an absolute mockery of the election. So you want to listen to my views on that in depth. That's at Tarpley.net, and that's the Press TV appearance. But now we have Poroshenko. All right, who is Poroshenko? An oligarch, the chocolate king, Willy Wonka. But somebody who finances fascism, that's his specialty. He's eggs of Maidan. So when you see Yarosh and at that point Muzichka, the fascist leader, how could they camp out there? Because they were all getting $25 a day base pay, and then from there, from Poroshenko. He used his television station and his money bags to make this whole Maidan fascist carnival and fascist festival what it was, right? Media event. So this is not a Democratic candidate, right? He's essentially the one who funded the goons and the thugs and the street fighters and the Sturmabteilung that then did their work. Now, what does he do? He says now, I'm the president, I have a mandate. And a mandate for what? For reconciliation? For social peace? No, he says, my mandate, in effect, is to pull out all the stops. In other words, to send the Ukrainian forces on a killing spree and finally crush all manifestations of dissent and resistance in eastern Ukraine. And that's pretty much what he was doing. So that started on the Monday after the Sunday, right? 24 hours this guy was allegedly in office, and then the killing starts in grand style. Now, in the midst of that killing, we also point out that the Ukraine army is doing badly. They're getting helicopters shot down. Their casualties. There was one day where they managed to hit a truck loaded with pro-Russian anti-fascist forces and killed 30 or 40 of them. But generally speaking, the casualties of the Ukraine army are not negligible. And the Ukraine army, most of them have much less reason to fight. They're not fighting for their lives. They're simply fighting for this Kiev fascist clique with Poroshenko now being there instead of Turchinov. It's also the case that the only people really that fight on the Ukrainian side are the most of them are the right sector thugs and goons, right, of Yarosh and so forth. This problem that we see that the Russian forces are not unified, right, that there was some kind of a standoff between two groups of anti-Kiev pro-Russian forces, well, that's what you get under these tremendously chaotic circumstances, right? Maybe the remedy for that is for Russia to come in and restore order, precisely. And we'll be back in just a minute on World Crisis Radio. May 30th here in New York City. It's about 1:30 in the afternoon, and I'm here because of the Left Forum. And I was just going through some of the points that compared to last year that I think are important this year. The other thing I would like to stress, Fukuyama says the end of history is a very sad time. So if that's your experience of the last 25 years or so, take heart. There may be new hope now. The world is going to look different now. This unipolar thing has been very bad. Again, it brought out the worst in the United States. Neocons, warmongers, reactionaries have thrived. Parasitism has increased. Unemployment, the degradation of the workforce, union busting, lowering of the standard of living, cultural barbarism, racism, all the neocon Republican sorts of themes, right? We've got libertarian, racists, and white supremacists running around. So things are going to change now. Ruling class is insane. And here's one thing that I would invite you to look at. Let's take Egypt. We congratulate General Sisi for his victory in the Egyptian elections. And I also would congratulate Hamdin Sabahi on his excellent campaign. Happy is Egypt, I would say. Happy is Egypt. They have a president who is actually qualified to be president. And if suppose we got Hamdin Sabahi as the prime minister, they would have a prime minister eminently qualified to be prime minister. And I hope that's the way they go. What we're seeing is that history really does have a continuity. And the natural form of government for Egypt, I would argue, is Nasserism. And if you follow these broadcasts, you may remember that from the beginning in Egypt in February of 2011, my hope and my prayer was, are there not Nasserist officers, young Nasserist officers, who can't stand the imperialist sellouts like Field Marshal Tantawi and who want to reassert some national pride in the Nasserist program. General Sisi has been running on infrastructure. This has been practically absent from the rotten U.S. press. One of Sisi's demands is 1 million housing units immediately. Now, I would put this is a great tradition, right? We one of the things we appreciated most about President Ahmadinejad of Iran was an effort, at least a valiant attempt, to start the construction of 20 million housing units, but that was understood as a long-term program. With Sisi, it's 1 million units, but it means 1 million units right now. This is the royal road. I'm absolutely delighted to see Sisi picking up this New Deal orientation of building infrastructure, in particular housing in this case. And, of course, remember, we looked last summer at the question of the Second Nile, where Mubarak had made some beginnings. The important thing is that the Muslim Brotherhood, this collection, this gaggle of oligarchs, right, rich businessmen, lawyers, editors, doctors, and all the rest of it, right, confederated not for any religious purpose primarily, but mainly to advance oligarchical self-interest, which is what they do. The Morsi Muslim Brotherhood regime was opposed to great projects. And this, of course, in our time, and probably other times too, condemns you to be a reactionary, to be on the wrong side of history. You look at Egypt, what's the obvious thing? That the Nile Valley is immensely fertile, but this is a very narrow ribbon going from north to south. What about the rest of the country? The Second Nile is absolutely essential. In other words, a comprehensive national irrigation and agricultural system, and the building of that, and then the running of the agriculture is absolutely key. So 1 million housing units, that's better than you're going to hear from any U.S. politician this year. And I think it shows. Now, hostility to Sisi is very great. This goes from, the State Department obviously hates him. Ann Patterson, when she was still there, U.S. ambassadress, did everything she could. The U.S., of course, the CIA is in a worldwide alliance with the Muslim Brotherhood. It's clear. Remember, Morsi, about, in the last month of his reign, wanted to attack Syria. He wanted to use the Egyptian army to save the terrorist rebels from their defeat at the hands of the Syrian Arab army. And that was a absolutely good reason to coup him, get him out of there. We also see the leftists. This is now the benighted, right? This is also stinks of corruption. We had Code Pink. Code Pink sent some fool to the State Department dressed up as General Sisi, and he's out there parading himself around saying, oh, I get all my money from here. I'm General Sisi, and the State Department pays me. This is simply factually wrong. They don't. They hate him. The State Department has done everything possible to sabotage, to put in obstacles, to harass, to intimidate, to threaten General Sisi and anybody else who was on this track. Because the State Department is in a worldwide alliance with the rotten Muslim Brotherhood. And don't tell me about religion. It is not relevant. Right? This is a political question. If you want to be treated as a religious figure, go to the mosque and stay there. But once you come out and run for office, then take over a government, then I'm sorry, you're going to be hit. So the chattering classes hate Sisi. It's clear. The leftists, I'm sure Amy Goodman is up in arms along with Code Pink and the rest of these people. So what can we say? How can we justify an authoritarian government? Maybe by looking at Libya. Right at the same time, the Libyan government fell in 2011. Now we have absolute chaos, hell on earth, and the contender to take over the country is Khalifa Haftar, CIA agent, CIA man, lived there, U.S. citizen. That's going to be the new CIA dictator of Libya. Hey, Kurt Pink, why don't you go and protest Khalifa Haftar, the CIA thug and killer? And of course, maybe you're a Republican? Then this is the guy who controls the February 23rd Martyrs Brigade that was supposed to provide the security at Benghazi when Ambassador Stevens got killed. And they disappeared. They ran away. And then the Ansar group of Guantanamo alumnus Kumu came in and did the killing. So don't you want to grill this Haftar and find out what he knows? But you get the idea. Maybe the Egyptians are looking at Algeria, right? Once you've seen it happen, it's not Libya, maybe Algeria, even grimmer, right? Death toll rather higher. In Algeria, right, the Islamic Salvation Front won the election. The army tried to keep them out, and then they didn't act fast enough. They didn't crush this group early in the process. And then you had 150,000 dead. Entire villages completely massacred, like the SS, right? Einsatzgruppe, but it was Algeria. So maybe people have learned that if you want to have civilization, you can't let the Muslim Brotherhood take over like that, because they, one man, one vote, one time. It's even worse because it leads towards civil war because of this oligarchical platform that these people feel they have to act out. So I'm sick of self-righteous, ill-informed criticism of the type leveled by Code Pink at somebody like Sisi. And again, I congratulate Sisi, and I hope that Hamdin Sabahi becomes the prime minister. This is one of our general themes also for the Left Forum here. If you look at the period after the 1848 revolutions in Europe, you will see that people who had been running around blathering a whole bunch of idiotic slogans about, let's have democracy and freedom and constitution. These are fine ideas, but you've got to have some way to make it feel. The most important aspect of this today is the material basis of democracy. As Franklin D. Roosevelt said in the four freedoms, in particular in the freedom from want category, free people cannot be needy people. Needy people can never be free people. And that's the basis of democracy. So don't tell me about parliaments. Tell me about the living standard and full employment. And we'll be back in it. Here we are in our fifth segment. It's World Crisis Radio coming from New York. Technically a little bit different this week, but we hope you can follow us. It's Friday, the 30th of May. I'm going to be speaking on Saturday, the 31st of May, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon at the Left Forum, and that's over at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and Law, I guess. So we'll be there. Now, we want to keep up also with the Tax Wall Street Party, I believe, and I think we have our favorite spokeswoman, Daniela Walls. Am I correct, Daniela? You there?
I am here, Webster.
Wonderful. All right. So you're assisting, you're assisting Dan Berdoff in Nebraska, running for United States Senate on the Tax Wall Street Party ticket. And he's running against Ben Sasse, the Republican golden boy, probably out of all the new faces and new candidates that have come forward in this political season. Ben Sasse has gotten the best and most publicity in the Eastern Wall Street-controlled news media. But you're digging into Ben Sasse and finding something rather different. In other words, the golden boy will not stand up to scrutiny. So maybe you tell us about this.
Well, yes, I am. And we're not fighting a regional battle. Ben Sasse was groomed for bigger things, Webster, than this Nebraska Senate race. And I think we're going to see something new here. We're going to see the Republicans mimic the Obama model with Ben Sasse. I'm going to give you a briefing on why I think the Republican Party is pinning its entire hope for the 2016 White House on our current local Nebraska competitor. But first I need to say that we're going to need people's help to expose them. We need to be able to produce materials, flyers, banners, and buy ads. So far, we're only effectively able to do this via social media. So please check out our Facebook page, Dan Burdorf for U.S. Senate, our Twitter, @Dan4Nebraska, and our website, danfornebraska.com. You can make a contribution on the website. And a giant thank you to those who have already contributed in the last few weeks. It's been very helpful. We have to get out our program, and we're also going to have to inoculate public opinion in the beginning now against the idea of this guy Sass being real. And you're going to hear that he's real many times in the coming months and in the coming years. His resume has been carefully built to make him look like this folk hero who just popped out of the Nebraska cornfields. Mark Levin, the radio host, called him a citizen candidate. I heard that the other night, and I was almost sick. And you're certainly going to hear hosts like Alex Jones maybe come out soon, just the way that Beck already did, and call Sass real. Alex supports Ted Cruz and Rand Paul, who are products of the exact same think tanks as Ben Sass. The Senate Conservatives Fund, Freedom Works, the Club for Growth, and the Heritage Foundation. They're all intertwined. And these PACs, you have to understand, give millions of dollars a year to hosts like Beck and Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh to promote for Sass. Glenn Beck got $2 million this year alone, and Sean Hannity got $1.3 from the Heritage Foundation, which is just one of the Heritage Foundation is just one of this in this clique. And all total, these guys are each getting many millions of dollars from these PACs. So people shouldn't believe their so-called opinion. I want Americans to learn how to research a candidate for themselves. First, it couldn't be easier. And the first step is to find out where the money's coming from. It'll take you 10 minutes. Do this before you end up listening to hours of opinion. First, go to fec.gov and type the candidate's name into the search bar. Then hit the link that says itemized individual contributions, and everything is there. And it's very empowering, and then you can make your own analysis. fec.gov, that's the Federal Election Commission. Everything is public, and going through Ben Sass's list of donors is a hoot. Then you come back and you can tell me if he's an independent. So go to the source document first, is my point. It's very important to do that. So you're going to hear Sass calling himself and all his ads a Washington outsider, but he has the most insider resume we've ever seen. This guy's more inside than Clinton or Obama ever was. He was the chief of staff at the U.S. Department of Justice. He was the chief of staff to a Representative Fortenberry. And he was chief of staff to Fortenberry Webster right out of a master's program in liberal arts at St. John's, which is really weird because usually a chief of staff is somebody who knows, the Hill better than the representative, somebody who's been around forever. So this guy comes right out of a liberal arts background and religion, theological background. We'll get into that in a second because that's a key element in all this. But with his resume, I just want to lay it out. He also had a consulting contract with the Department of Homeland Security. He was the head of our largest department, which is HHS, Health and Human Services. He was a liaison between the intelligence community. He was a liaison between the FBI and CIA while he was at the Department of Justice. So basically,
that I think is a really important one, that he's the interface of CIA, FBI, and DOJ, but he's just a homeboy. He's just plain folks like the rest of us.
It's unbelievable. He's a spook. He's no small-town boy, right?
A spook. There you go.
A spook. It's spook. That's what he is. So Sass, and Sass has been trained at the most elite academic institutions and Wall Street firms. He's been in the darkest positions in government. He's been in some dark places in government. He's been around a bunch of scandals, and that needs to be investigated. There's a laundry list of scandals, so I need to get into that too, so give me a minute for that. But he's also a major player in the neo-Calvinist religious movement. And they're going to expect you to think like he's just a small-town college president, like you were saying, who grew up detasseling corn. And I think Ben Sass is a very dangerous person because he's a well-oiled vehicle for austerity dictatorship. There are theocratic overtones that are more troubling than anything Reagan or Bush represented. We're going to have to hurt this strategy in its infancy, both by forcing the debate into the realm of economic demands and exposing Sass as a fraud. And this campaign of Dan's is the perfect way for us to do it. If we can get the support and resources we need, like I said, you can please join us and join this fight by contributing to danfornebraska.com. If you also want to send a check, our P.O. box is on the website if you'd like to mail that instead of going via PayPal. So I don't know where we want to go. There's so many avenues here. There's the religion.
Look, I think what people are really intrigued about is we were able to identify Obama as the chosen, anointed one, Manchurian candidate of the Wall Street establishment in January of 2008. So in the year of the vote. And I think the difference now this time around is that we've essentially got a very good prima facie case that Sass may be, let's say Sass and Cotton, this duo, because they always come as duos, right? That this may be the ruling class secret option, the surprise option, the golden boy coup option, whatever you want to call it, for 2016, except this time it's 2.5 years until the presidential election. So is he the 45th president, and where does this idea come from?
He threatens to be the next president with his funding from the top echelon of ultra elite. And it's not just about Sass as much as he's the vehicle for the Republican establishment, who they are and what they represent, and more importantly, what they're about to represent. The Republican Party can't contend for the presidency anymore because of the changing demographics. We talked about that in another show with the rise of the new millennials, and anyway, because and they've also exposed themselves as austerity goals. But Sass is different because Sass can unite the Tea Party and the business Republicans. He's the first. He has, not that he can. He already has. That process began the day after he won the primary. He reached out to Mitch McConnell, who these PACs were notorious. The PACs that he's was born out of are notorious for having gone after Mitch McConnell. Is that the break? He's the first.
That's the break. Come back and let's keep you on for a few more minutes at least.
Okay.
We want to hear all about Ben Sass and why he may be Wall Street's choice to be 45th president of the United States. That means 2016. So time to get informed. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Topley in New York City for the Left Forum. You can see me at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Saturday, the 31st of May. At the John Jay College of Criminal Justice, 3 p.m. Now, we're talking with Daniela Walls of the Tax Wall Street Party, volunteer for Dan Berdorf. And if you want to find us, I think it's BUHRDORF, Dan for Nebraska. And Dan for Nebraska, he's been there, .com, been there for, the family's been there for 4 to 5 generations. But right now we're focusing on the opposition, right? This Ben Sass, Republican golden boy, but is he a Manchurian candidate? And Daniela, you were the first one to find these references to 45th president, that he was the 45th president of the United States 20 to 25 years ago. Tell us where that came from specifically.
We found that. Well, I found that New York Times comment from Rebecca. I found several comments in different places.
You got to tell us what it is, though, because some people don't know.
You talked about Rebecca's comment on the last episode, but Rebecca commented.
Let's do it again. It's very important.
Okay, Rebecca commented on a New York Times article, and she writes, "This is just a comment under an article about Ben Sass, a generic article. I met Ben Sass during high school and never forgot him. He introduced himself as the 45th president, parentheses Republican, who would go to Yale and then run for office as a Republican. I told a friend about this who called me up her first week at Harvard to say she met a guy who said he was going to be the 45th president, exclamation point. Looks like 45th won't happen, but God help us if he even gets close." I'm not sure that that's not true, that 45th may happen if we follow the Obama model like I was talking about.
Absolutely. The lesson is don't stay in the Senate because you have to make votes. And as soon as you vote, you've turned off a whole bunch of people. So vote present, whatever, and then run for president immediately. Right.
So we're saying he's following the Obama model. Now, listen, so Sass is different than anybody we've seen because Sass can unite the Tea Party with the business Republicans. He's the first consensus candidate since the Tea Party came in and started to break up the party. He has the pretensions of being blue collar, unlike Mitt Romney, right? Mitt Romney lost in part because he was an elitist. And like we said, Sass is an elitist. However, he has the pretension of being blue collar. He is intellectual, unlike somebody like Chris Christie, who can be seen as a thug. And the old Republican strategy was to give the presidency as a retirement gift or maybe a parting gift to the old people like Bob Dole, John McCain, or even Bush Jr. But now the strategy has changed. And I think they're going to go, like we said, with the Obama model and run a young guy with no past. And like you were just saying, with no voting record. Like Obama, they won't want to keep him in the Senate for long, where he can have a bunch of votes that can be criticized, right? So they can't count on Rand Paul to take the presidency. Sass is much more electable than Rand Paul. And please remember, they're coming out of the same think tanks. It's just that Sass has been chosen and Rand Paul has not been chosen. Sass is the perfect vehicle and for the Republicans now to seize power in the foreseeable future, and he is their hope to do it. So far, he's the only hope in the country that I can find. I don't think that you were talking about how they come in pairs, and I'm interested in that, him coming with Tom Cotton. But I can't find any other pair out there waiting besides this guy. He has an intellectual air, so he can be taken seriously. Sass is the only the consensus candidate. He's got Cruz, he's got Palin, he's got Boehner, and now he's got Mitch McConnell. So they're all together on this. And so there's no consensus, no question that he's not the consensus candidate. And Sass is running for Senate now, and Obama, like we said, ran for president only a year or two after he was in Senate. And if I'm correct, this plot will be exactly the same with the two guys. That's what I'm thinking. It also fits the pattern with Carter and Nixon. With Nixon, you had a completely unpopular presidency, so they brought in this so-called outsider peanut farmer like Carter, and Carter came out of a place where nobody had been elected in ages, and Sass is coming out of a place where nobody has been elected in ages, right? So during Nixon, you have scandal, you have Watergate in Vietnam, and Obama has NSA and ongoing wars, and all this stuff that's weakening the presidency. Basically, Obama's a failed president, because most people don't support him and are not happy with where it went, same like Nixon. So what was the establishment's answer to that? Well, then they got a peanut farmer, governor from the South, and, where there hadn't been a president since before the Civil War. And now they're looking to the northern plain states where there hasn't been a president. And so you have this guy from nowhere, is what I'm trying to say. Sass, who's claiming to be an outsider. Funny that that's his first slogan out of the gate. And coming in to possibly win the Senate and then the presidency. Similar to Rick Carter responding to Nixon. And at the time, everybody wanted an outsider, right? Because you had all the corruption and the scandal. And so they wanted somebody free of Washington influence. And of course, Carter wasn't a real outsider. I mean, you've talked about this so much, Webster, but he wasn't a real outsider. He was Trilateral Commission. So he was an insider that just happened to be from an outsider place, like Georgia. The same thing with Clinton. Maybe he was supposedly an outsider because he was a governor from Arkansas. But now we all know how much of an insider Clinton actually was. Same thing's going on here. So these are parallels. These are parallels.
But the only way to flush him out, the only way to determine all of this stuff is with an opposition candidate who can ask the tough questions and get answers. So give us the data again, and remember, people, he's gathering signatures, right? There's the whole period now, June and July, getting signatures. So if you want to have a nice heartland vacation out under the sun on the prairie,
come out.
Think about taking a week and going to Nebraska.
That would be great. We only have one bed in the office. We can get some cots, but hopefully people can come out and we'll try to find you places to stay. But maybe somebody can come out who can afford a hotel room. We're a little pressed for space.
We'll get some local volunteers. We're just beginning, so.
Yes, but if there's local volunteers in Nebraska who are hearing this, come and join us.
Absolutely.
And you'll have a lot of fun collecting signatures. But more than anything, we need people in Nebraska. So,
and again, it's not some local campaign. This could be very high stakes. This could be the presidency. We don't know. we've laid out the case, and there's going to be more about this. But Sasse is somebody who has very great potential, not just for the Republican Party, but for Wall Street and London. This is what it comes down to. So please, once again, how can people help?
You can donate by going to danfornebraska.com. And like you said, donations are very important to expose the next neocon globalist, whatever you want to call it, groomed by the elite. So, Dan for Nebraska.
The music is telling us we've run out of time, Daniela. Sorry. Going to have to get you back soon to give us an update on the progress of the campaign and also this really interesting intelligence work. Thank you very much.
Very much.
Welcome back to World Crisis Radio here from New York City. I'm about to address the Left Forum on Saturday, the 31st of May. Some of the themes: the end of history is over. History may have been stalled. It really wasn't, but might have seemed that way to some. History is still alive and well. The end of history was a mirage or a demagogic chimera launched by neocons. The ruling class is nuts in the Anglo-American world because they have built their careers on this. This is their approach, right? They think they're the masters of human destiny. But there's the majority of the world out there, Russia, China, India, and Brazil, and many more, South Africa, who don't share this lunatic view. So the Fukuyama thesis is a dead duck. The Daniel Bell end of ideology thesis is a dead duck. And, of course, the Jessica Matthews power shift nonsense of the late 90s. And what we need now is the new toughness of mind. In other words, it's simply too late in the game. The stakes are too high to have people who go around, they treat politics as where they can where they can experience the subjective satisfactions that they're looking for. And some of them want to be duped, right? A lot of people who supported Obama were telling that they knew that they were being duped and that this is what they wanted. They'd rather be duped and go along with Obama than sit on the sidelines. As I was trying to say before, in the 1848 revolutions, every government in continental Europe was overthrown, right? Starting with King Louis Philippe of France, Metternich of Austria, the Pope, everybody, all of them were overthrown. Not the British and not Russia, but everything in between overthrown. What came out of that was what historians have referred to as the new toughness of mind. That romantic blather, utopian slogans, and so forth are not enough, and indeed actually can be extremely damaging to society. A new toughness of mind that was summed up as realpolitik. Now, the person who's associated with this, I mean, you can associate it with quite a few, but Bismarck of Germany, Otto von Bismarck, the Chancellor of Prussia and then of the German Empire. Let me hasten to point out, unless you've really looked at it, you don't know who this is, because the Anglo-American propaganda, because of the world wars and so forth, there's an overlay, there's a thick layer of slanders and so forth about this guy. But think about it, to be the architect of one of the great unified nations of the modern world, and to be a protectionist and dirigist in economics, right? Because remember, the American system of Hamilton and Carey is the same as the German system of Friedrich List. And Friedrich List is actually on both sides of the Atlantic. But Bismarck is associated with some of these ideas. Bismarck, by the way, just to get an idea, some of his ideas are they're quite pervasive. In other words, he influences you more than you know, most likely. For example, if you've ever listened to cable television Sunday morning, or broadcast Sunday morning journalism, you will have heard that politics is the art of the possible. Well, politics is the art of the possible. That's Bismarck. That's the guy who said it. And he was also devoted to war avoidance. One of his good sayings is, preventive war is like committing suicide for fear of death. The neocons should put that in their pipes and smoke it. Preventive war is like committing suicide for fear of death. Otto von Bismarck. And the other one is he was uncanny in his vision of what the First World War would look like. And he says this in 1878. Europe today is a powder keg, and the leaders are like men smoking in an arsenal. A single spark will set off an explosion that will consume us all. I cannot tell you when that explosion will occur, but I can tell you where. Some damned foolish thing in the Balkans will set it off. And that's, 35 years more before World War I actually starts, but he can see it coming. But the one that I think is relevant for our proceedings is, this is something he says after the 1848 revolutions. The great issues of the day are not decided through speeches and majority votes. That was the great error of 1848 and 1849, but through blood and iron. Now, if we could say that the Arab Spring, 2011, 12, 13, and certainly finished by now, if that was the age of utopia and the golden youth and the idea that you could reform a country with internet freedom or, Occupy, where the demands were more money for the Securities and Exchange Commission, or campaign finance reform, or Occupy public space, that's really the stupidest one of all. That's the age of blather. That's the age of nonsense, of anarchism, and really criminally wasting great world historic possibilities. We're now in the age of blood and iron. In other words, it comes down to this. Under conditions of a depression, and I think this we can call this the lessons of the Arab Spring, if you want to. That's in quotes, Arab Spring. In a world depression, the high levels of unemployment and falling standards of living means that every nation state, and indeed civilization itself, are dangerously vulnerable to attack by the CIA and other imperialist agencies. That's what the Arab Spring was. And the golden youth in the public square were simply props, even though they didn't know it. In Tunisia, it was a military coup organized by the CIA among generals using those golden youth as the props, right? But then the CIA had also contracted with the Muslim Brotherhood to come in and take over. That has also ended, and not as tragic quite yet as Libya or Algeria, but still plenty bad. So the world depression means that the nation state is very vulnerable to CIA attack, and that's what the CIA wants to attack. So that's one of the things you have to face. The question I tried to stress before: if you want to have rule of law, if you want to have a democratic republic, if you want to have representative government, that takes a material basis. As Roosevelt said in the Atlantic Charter, needy people cannot be free people. It actually reads, necessitous men cannot be free men. But today, needy people cannot be free people. That's freedom from want. In much of the world, the choice is between authoritarianism and chaos. So which is better, Gaddafi or Hitler? Gaddafi is better. It's clear. Which is better, Sisi or Morsi, who's going to lead the country into a war with Syria and adventurism without end, and bringing in Qaradawi and these other lunatics from Al Jazeera? Sisi is better than Morsi. And again, any national state is better than no state. In other words, any national state, even some of the worst, are better than the kind of chaos that you see in Libya or someplace like this right now. So I would say that would be the realpolitik, tough-minded view, and that when you have a mass strike situation, you can't regard this as a chance to go on vacation and camp in the park and act out every utopian wish, dream, fancy, chimera you've ever had. No, that is irresponsible. Okay, so that I think is one of the things. You've got to use those opportunities to get certain things done in terms of programmatic education organization. And once again, this is Webster Tarpley in New York City for the Left Forum. I also wanted to ask you, which is better, a member of the Nusra Brigade who cannibalizes a human heart on television, or Assad, representing what was a sort of middle-class regime, more or less? I think it's clear, right? The choice was between Assad and chaos. So congratulations to Assad. He has the upper hand in the war, and he's going to be reelected. And I think that's fine. It's not fine. It's the best that can be gotten. Okay? So I would go with that. Now, just remember now, in terms of the European elections, some quick notes. Le Pen and Farage are racist scoundrels, right? They have nothing to contribute. The idea there, as I tried to argue on Press TV this past Tuesday evening, is the bankers want scapegoats. The bankers don't want to be the targets of all the resentment and hatred from the Depression, all the unemployment and privation and so forth. They want a scapegoat. In Britain, it's generally Pakistanis and West Indians. In France, it's Algerians, can be others. In Italy, it's Somalians and Moroccans, and on and on. So that is the stock and trade of this group. Le Pen and Farage. They're discredited hacks. They've been around for a long time. They're sleazy. They're, intellectually contemptible. Notice, however, Le Pen fortified herself with anti-globalization, in which she wants protectionism and anti-austerity. And I think that's the difference, right? Le Pen, as a racist, xenophobic candidate, Islamophobic, gets you 10 or 15%. But the anti-austerity, when it doesn't look like any of the other really big parties were doing it, this also gave her a big push. Salvini of the Northern League in Italy, again, Farage is not willing to join Le Pen because, of course, he's British, he's xenophobic. But Farage has now made common front with Grillo. And this stresses what I've said the whole time. Grillo is sleazy, proto-fascist, racist, and so forth. The message in Greece is the message of hope. Time for early elections. Elections right now, Samaras out, Tsipras in. And remember, in Greece, there is this majority bonus. So you don't need to get the majority with the coalition. You're going to get if you come in first, you're going to get a big majority bonus. So I think that's extremely important. And again, important that Grillo was defeated, that the good sense of the Italian people was to repudiate this demagogue who was talking about tribunals. He sounded like the Cloven Bundy set, right, that they want to have tribunals to put public officials on trial. And again, notice this entire thing is anti-politician in an era when we need anti-banker. Ultimately, Grillo plays the game of De Benedetti and Soros and the rest of them. He claims to be their opponent, but his main attack is not on them, but on the politicians, right? That the politicians all have to go home, and so forth. What else do we have here? Concerning the Veterans Administration and General Shinseki, clear the Republicans have hated General Shinseki since he tried to block Bush and the neocons and the Iraq question. But remember, there are now large numbers of returning veterans. The Republicans have never voted enough money for this system, so the bureaucrats respond by these evasive actions. The New York Times, which I have in front of me right now, doctor shortage is cited in delays in VI hospitals. There are not enough doctors. Now, that's the other underlying real economic question of healthcare. You want to have healthcare, you better train 250,000 doctors right now, and 1,000 hospitals, including as many of these VA hospitals as are needed. Now we have to say a word about Snowden. NBC leaves no doubt Snowden is the darling of Immelt. Immelt loves Snowden. NBC, MSNBC devoted an entire evening to Snowden, An Evening with Ed Snowden, or Ed Snowden at Home. That was Brian Williams going to Moscow with a crew, doing the interview, and then a panel discussion with Pete Williams and Madame Greenspan and all the rest of it. Snowden says that he's from the CIA, he's from the NSA, and he's from the DIA. He was a lecturer for the DIA. He repeats twice, I'm still working for the government, I'm still working for the government. That's right, you are. You are a limited hangout. And he talks as if the principal activity of CIA, DIA, and NSA was to tap phone calls. This, my friends, is not true. What about 9/11? What about the Kennedy assassination? What about the goings-on in the Secret Service? What about Iran-Contra? What about the color revolutions? You get the idea. He has nothing to tell us about all this. Why is it so selective? And, of course, he doesn't even decide. Glenn Greenwald, and Poitras do the choosing. We even learn that NBC, through one of his other conduits, has entered into a relationship with Greenwald and therefore with Snowden. You may remember the careers of Noam Chomsky and of Howard Zinn were built on the idea that these two figures were among the most prominent in telling everybody, Daniel Ellsberg is great, Daniel Ellsberg is the real thing, lionize Daniel Ellsberg, make him a leader, this is the big thing. When that was all stuff that Le Monde and Corriere and other papers in Europe, they published all of it. There was nothing new. There was nothing big, nothing new, nothing on the Kennedy assassination, nothing on the Bay of Pigs, right, in terms of staging it, nothing about the Gulf of Tonkin, none of that. So this is what he's offering. He also does a paranoid trip. He wants you to be really frightened. The CIA knows every keystroke. They know what you're thinking. They know what you're doing. And you can think of all these petty bourgeois with their teeth chattering and they're shuddering. And of course, revolutionary action is not private. Revolutionary action is public. So if you want to do revolutionary action, you better get used to quite a bit of scrutiny. And indeed, that's your goal. So the only thing I would sympathize with Snowden on is when they say, why don't you come back and face justice, face the music, as Kerry of Skull and Bones demands. You look at this poor guy Manning, poor Corporal Manning, and what was done to Corporal Manning. I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna go into solitary confinement in a refrigerated room for 2 years as a part of your ridiculous approach, Kerry. So remember, this is also under the Woodrow Wilson Espionage Act, which essentially denies you the possibility to a defense. You can't do that. But that doesn't bother Glenn Greenwald. He's making money hand over fist, right? He is now a limited hangout entrepreneur. Greenwald, Poitras, and others. We've also had this interesting moment where Assange and WikiLeaks have attacked Greenwald because he's sitting on this immense cache of documents, they say, and not sharing them, meaning that he's hoarding them until the price goes up even more. Remember that Greenwald, 30th of December 2013, put out a tweet identifying yours truly as the principal world source of all the stuff about limited hangout. And I plead guilty. I am. And about that and PsyOps, but principally the question of the limited hangout. If you look at Wikipedia, I figure there as an authority. And I would just say the 17th century example is Fra, brother Paolo Sarpi of Venice, and he's the one who wrote that interesting essay, How to Refute Negative Propaganda, Confutar Scritture Malediche, Anti-Venetian Propaganda. And one of the ways, he says, is to have a limited hangout, to say something good about somebody while pretending to say something bad. And that has not changed. And that, of course, goes back much further than Sardi. It goes back to the ancient world classical civilization. But remember, the most likely interpretation of Snowden is an active duty CIA agent, as he says himself, for the government, but mainly acting to try to cut the NSA down to size and to privatize these functions, right? That from now on, it shouldn't be the government wiretapping you and so forth, but it should be a private company doing it. So that notion of privatization and by Kerry, Fabius, Haig, and the rest of this gang to try to get the bombing going. And at that point, Putin and Lavrov intervened to prevent it. So that's one continuous thread that we want to talk about again this year, the continuing defeat of the terrorists in Syria, and in effect the defeat of what has to be considered a secret army of the CIA. Although, of course, for some reason, Ed Snowden can't tell us anything about how that was set up, even though, this whole thing had been very much going in 2011, 2012, plenty of time, 2013, for old Ed Snowden to tell us about it. But somehow this is not his cup of tea. The big stuff, that's not on his agenda. Anyway, last year at the Left Forum, I also talked about the coming of a mass strike wave in 2015, and that there would already be signs. There were already signs then, and the signs have continued to multiply. You've just got to be sufficiently flexible and, up to date in the definition of what a mass strike might look like. For example, you look at Ukraine, and we've just had this magnificent march of workers, right? There was a column of industrial workers, steel workers and coal miners, as far as the eye could see, demanding that the killer fascist clique in Kiev back off with their bloody attacks on civilians in eastern Ukraine. All of that going on, of course, with the cheers of Samantha Power, her loopiness, and Kerry and Nuland and Piat and the rest of these people, really, who I think will be in Portugal, in Spain, in Italy, with the defeat of Grillo, right? Grillo had said he was going to come in first, and instead he lost votes. He lost 4 or 5 percentage points of the overall vote. Grillo, racist, anti-foreigner, defeated. In Greece, we've said it, Tsipras and Syriza #1. And in Romania, there is a pro-labor, anti-austerity vote. Well, you could say, well, Renzi of Italy, how can you say this is all pro-labor? Well, the appearance is what they were voting for, and the appearance was that he arranged a payment, a tax refund of 80 euros per person. And that's obviously chicken feed, $100, a little bit more. That's more concrete than the endless blathering, dithering, screaming, threatening, rageful Grillo was able to do. If you go to an Italian worker and say, what did Grillo do for you? The answer is absolutely nothing. And Renzi can say at least, well, I gave you an 80 euro tax refund. So something is better than nothing. Obviously, Renzi remains what we've said here. Yes, we're now going to have our second segment of World Crisis Radio. Things are a little bit unsettled because we are on the road here and using not the usual equipment. All right. So, those two themes, right? Yeah, a big defeat for imperialism. It gets us into the Russian question. And then, of course, this issue of the mass strike, which has taken to forms that are perhaps unexpected. But we're still on track. 2015, I think, is still a very good estimate of where this is going to happen. The other thing that we have to mention is this question of how insane the U.S. ruling class is, right? How bonkers they are. This is Webster Tarpley reporting this week from New York City. I am in New York City for the Left Forum, and if you hear this on Saturday afternoon, You have to be in Manhattan or pretty close to come over to John Jay College of Criminal Justice on the west side and come and listen to our event and take part in it, participate. And that's going to be about 3 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, the Left Forum. There is some vague possibility that it may be live streamed, so this I just don't know. That's completely up in the air, but it might be, so I guess check my Twitter feed would be the place to look for that. So looking forward to the Left Forum. Now, in doing this, I'm considering the talk I gave a year ago here at the Left Forum, which was focused really on two things that stood out. One was that the Syrian civil war had taken an important turning point. That was the liberation of the city of Qusair on the Lebanese border, or near the Lebanese border, perhaps halfway from Damascus to Homs, a bit over to the west of that line. And that this meant that the terrorist rebels, the lunatic fighters, enemies of all civilization, that had been brought in by Prince Bandar of Saudi Arabia and indeed by the Qatar royal house, that they were going to be defeated. And that, of course, then led, after it became clear in June that the terrorist rebels were on the ropes, that led to the attempted false flag event, ending a vacation in Nuremberg before too long. Think about that as a mass strike. In other words, think about what you see going on in Ukraine as, to some degree, a political mass strike spearheaded by coal miners and steel workers, and they're fighting fascism. Seems like an old or outmoded way of looking at it, but I think that gets you right to the heart of what's actually going on before your eyes. And we will also spend a little time looking at the question of the European Parliament vote, which, of course, a mass strike is not an election per se, but the results of an election, and this has happened again and again, the results of an election can be influenced one way or another by a mass strike. So I would say the fact that Syriza of Alexis Tsipras is now the number one party of Greece, and they're demanding an election, they're demanding the dissolution of the parliament and early elections. The fact that Tsipras is out there as the presumptive prime minister of the country, you can say that that's the fruit of a mass strike going on over the last couple of years in the background. And, surprisingly, in Spain as well, the emergence of the Podemos party, whatever critiques or differences we might have with their with the details of what they're doing, that is certainly a very encouraging turn of events. And I would say one of the things we'll try to raise here at the Left Forum is, okay, guys, you were big fans of the Indignados, the essentially anarchists, right? The anarchist encampment of Puerta del Sol, Madrid, built by the army, as we had occasion to point out on this broadcast, right, with a direct eyewitness report. The camp was built by the army because the reactionary and fascist forces of Spain wanted a backlash. So you bring in the Indignados, they proceed to camp in the park, essentially, or camp in the public square with all the functions that go along with that. And then you get a backlash. All right, but now, distilled out of that picture, that's all you can call it, backlash first, and Rajoy, the reactionary austerity fiend, was brought in. Now, at least part of this Indignados movement, if that's what you want to call it, has seen the light and formed a political party. And not only have they done that, they've gotten 8% of the vote and 5 seats in the European Parliament. And I think that's a very good model. So I would go to the leftists gathered here in New York this week and say, look, you were telling us how great Indignados were. Now that the best Indignados have formed a political party with a program, the program obviously needs a lot of work, but and they've shown that this can be done in 3 months. What in God's name is preventing that from being done here in the United States? Why must we always have the path of anarchist impotence and paralysis and indeed sabotage? No way around it. But I think that's also the fruit of a mass strike process. And indeed, all across Southern Europe, you can say, and again, this is very much a matter of the intentions and the desires and the aspirations of voters, right? Because that is what we're trying to determine, not how corrupt the various political leaders are, because a lot of them are. But